Now, the modern church begins in the 15th century. And believe me, everyone back then was using Apocalypse for their own purposes. For example, you all know that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, right? But where did he get money to actually make this expedition? Christopher Columbus was short of money, and he decided to raise some funds. In order to do that, he wrote a big letter, a long letter, to the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, asking them to sponsor one of his trips. And the reason for sponsoring, according to Columbus, was that the apocalypse is approaching, after all. And the Spanish crown may actually get some gold, lots of gold, when Christopher Columbus, as he said, would finally discover India. And he will take this gold, deliver it to the crown. The Spanish crown will build the kingdom of God on earth and will initiate the millennium. And that's how the apocalypse will begin. So that was his marketing strategy. That's how he raised some money to take this expedition, to make this expedition, and finally, instead of India, he discovered America. You all know about Isaac Newton, and you know that Isaac Newton was the greatest scientist. But you do not know that Isaac Newton was obsessed with the apocalypse. And in addition to his scientific pursuits, he knew ancient languages, and he was studying ancient scriptures, and he wrote a huge book of his own interpretation of the book of Revelation and what the apocalypse means. So the apocalypse was always a popular topic because people feared it, and people hoped it will come, people hoped that they will see it. It will be something extraordinary, it will be the end of the world, after all. And as a result of the end of the world, the New Jerusalem will come. So it gave hope as well. The most interesting new interpretations of the apocalypse in modern church, however, came after the rise of Protestantism. Now, Martin Luther was the founder of Protestantism, and he started this new movement in 1517, in the 16th century. As you may recall, Martin Luther was disappointed with the Catholic teaching. He did not intend to split from Catholicism. He wanted to purify Catholicism. He was against indulgences because he thought that you cannot buy your way into heaven. So at some point, he posted his 95 Theses on the door of the church where he lived. The Catholics were slow to respond. Martin Luther was ready to debate his views with anyone who would like to debate. He had some debates with Catholic theologians. But again, the Catholic Church was slow to respond. And when they realized that Martin Luther is a threat to the Catholic teaching, they wanted to deliver him to the Inquisition, but he was lucky. He escaped the Inquisition. And after that, he was excommunicated, and Protestantism started. So by 1521, Martin Luther was already excommunicated from the church. And he proceeded anyway. He never intended to create his own Christian denomination, but he did. This denomination is known as Lutheran denomination. Martin Luther used the newly invented printing press, and he was writing, publishing, and distributing his pamphlets about his new teaching and about Catholicism. Now, since Martin Luther split from the Catholic Church, he reinterpreted the book of Revelation, and according to his new interpretation, the book of Revelation was not only about the past or the future, but it was also about the present situation in the Christian church. It was also about the fight between Catholics and Protestants. So it was Martin Luther who developed this new interpretation that the Catholic Pope is actually the Antichrist. And the whole church of Catholicism is the whore of Babylon. Now, we have to say that the idea that the Pope may be the Antichrist was already present in the Middle Ages. But Martin Luther took this idea and developed it to its fullest capacity, because according to Martin Luther, it is not this or that Pope that is the Antichrist, but papacy itself, as the institution, is the institution of the Antichrist. And that the Catholic Church itself is the whore of Babylon that is described in the book of Revelation, because of the abuses of the Catholic Church, because of the sins of the Catholic Church, and because the Catholic Church actually was led astray, strayed away from the true teaching of Jesus. Now, obviously, Catholics did not like that, and they responded accordingly. Catholics produced their own interpretations of Revelation, according to which it was Luther who was the Antichrist, and it was his followers and other reformers who were seen as different heads of the beast, of the dragon that was described in the book of Revelation. All in all, the 17th century saw a flood of books that were devoted to the Apocalypse and to the interpretation of the book of Revelation. And all those new interpretations were divided into three main categories: the so-called futurist or eschatological interpretations, historical interpretations, and prophetic interpretations. So futurist interpretations emphasized that the book of Revelation is predicting the future, that it has nothing to do with the past, it has nothing to do with the present. Historical interpretations argued that the book of Revelation is describing the past, the history, but has nothing to do with the present or the future. And finally, prophetic revelations stressed out that the book of Revelation is both about the past and the future, but some portions of the book also talk about the present situation. So obviously Catholics preferred either the historical or the futurist interpretation, while Protestants preferred the prophetic interpretations, because they wanted to show that the book of Revelation speaks about the situation with the Catholic Church in their day. In the end, after a century of debates, biblical scholars settled on the historical interpretation of the book of Revelation. A Catholic theologian, Bossuet, at the end of the 17th century, produced his major work on the book of Revelation, in which he used the most recent archaeological discoveries and most recent methodologies of in the text interpretation. So as a result, Bossuet claimed that the book of Revelation is not about the future, but it is about history. That the book of Revelation is not about some kind of millennium that will happen on earth in the very distant future, but the book of Revelation is an indictment of Roman power, that it is about the Roman Empire, that it is about its militarism, its idolatry, that the book of Revelation was a secret coded message to the then contemporary Christians who perfectly understood what it was about. And therefore that the book of Revelation should be taken as the book of history. So by the end of the 17th century, that became the most popular approach among biblical scholars. And the next step in Christian theology, in the interpretation of the book of Revelation, was made already in the 18th and the 19th century. But this next step cannot be properly understood unless we talk about the 18th century Europe, unless we talk about the cultural movement of modernity or the Enlightenment that took place in Europe in the 18th century. And that would be our next topic.